supposed to be our last night of trick-or-treating before we realized we might be getting a bit too old for it. Lisa and I decided to make the most of Halloween, as it had always been our tradition since childhood. The streets of Crestwood, Ohio were filled with kids in costumes, laughter, and the sound of candy bags being carried around. Everything felt normal, just like I remembered from every Halloween before. Lisa was dressed as a witch, with a pointy hat she insisted on wearing every year. I was dressed as a vampire, a lazy choice, I admit, but an effective one. We were laughing and talking about how much we'd missed these nights when I noticed something strange. A few yards away, near a large tree, stood a man wearing a clown mask. He didn't seem to be participating in the fun. In fact, he was just standing there, watching us. I found it odd, but didn't mention anything to Lisa right away. Maybe it was just someone waiting for friends or gearing up for a prank. We kept walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. I glanced back, and there he was, the clown, still at the same distance, still watching us. Lisa noticed my glance and turned to see what was bothering me. When she saw the clown, she grabbed my arm tighter. "Jake, is he following us?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "It's probably just someone trying to scare people. You know how Halloween is," I replied, trying to reassure her, but I wasn't entirely convinced myself. We kept walking, trying to ignore the growing unease, but the clown didn't stop following us. He never got too close, but he also never let us out of his sight. I could feel the tension rising between us, and I knew Lisa was getting more and more frightened. We decided it was time to call it a night and head home. But when we changed direction, so did he. If we sped up, he kept pace. It was clear this wasn't just a harmless prank. We were being followed. The discomfort Lisa and I were feeling quickly turned into panic. With each step we took towards my house, the clown followed. I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself he would stop or maybe he was just messing around. But the more we walked, the clearer it became that this was serious. "Jake, we need to run," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed her hand and we started running. The sound of our footsteps echoed down the street, and what was supposed to be a fun night turned into a desperate race. I looked back once and saw the clown start running too, his grotesque silhouette outlined by the streetlights. He was holding something in his hand, a long, shiny knife, reflecting the light from the street lamps. Terror hit me hard. There was no doubt now. He was hunting us. We ran as fast as we could, fear intensifying with each second. The houses around us, once so familiar, seemed to turn into a threatening maze. Every shadow, every sound, made the situation even more terrifying. Lisa was gasping for breath, and I knew she couldn't keep this up much longer. Finally, we spotted my house as we turned a corner. Without thinking twice, we sprinted to the door, and with trembling hands, I managed to unlock and open it. We rushed inside, and I slammed the door shut, locking all the bolts quickly. I could hear Lisa trying to catch her breath, the panic still evident in her eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "Grab the phone, call the police," I responded, already reaching for my cell. But before I could dial, I heard the sound of footsteps outside. He was there, right in front of the house. The sound was unmistakable. He was circling, trying to find a way in. "Let's go to the basement," I suggested. "It's safer down there." We hurried down the stairs, and as I locked the basement door behind us, Lisa hid behind the newly renovated bar I had set up. The adrenaline was preventing me from thinking clearly, but I tried to keep control. I called the police and reported what was happening, telling them there was an armed man inside or around my house, threatening me and my girlfriend. We could hear the footsteps above us, each movement seeming closer. He was searching the house, knocking things over, opening doors, looking for us. Lisa and I stayed still behind the bar, trying to make as little noise as possible, our breathing controlled but still fast. Finally, we heard the police sirens in the distance. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and then we heard the quick sound of someone running towards the exit. The police sirens were approaching fast, and the sound was a relief for both me and Lisa. However, the terror wasn't over yet. We heard the clown's footsteps retreating through the house, moving quickly towards the exit. I knew he was trying to escape before the police arrived. Holding Lisa's hand tightly, we stayed hidden behind the bar, waiting and praying that he wouldn't come back. The basement was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the sirens and the heavy footsteps of the intruder above us. Suddenly, everything went quiet. We could no longer hear his footsteps. Had he left? Was he waiting outside the basement door, ready to attack us? The fear was paralyzing. I knew we needed to wait for the police, but the uncertainty was driving me crazy. Finally, we heard the front door being broken down, followed by a series of voices shouting orders. The police had arrived, but the clown was still missing. One of the officers called out to us, saying it was safe to come out. With shaky legs, I helped Lisa up, and we both slowly emerged from our hiding spot, our hearts still pounding in our chests. When we went upstairs, we found the house ransacked. Furniture overturned, doors left open, and signs of destruction in every room. But there was no sign of the clown. The police had searched the area, but he had already fled, disappearing into the night. "Is he gone?" I asked, still unable to believe we were safe. "Yes, but we don't know for how long," one of the officers replied. "We've searched the neighborhood, but he could be anywhere." Lisa and I stepped outside, still in shock. We were led away as the police continued to investigate, searching for any clues that might lead to the man who had terrorized us. One of the officers asked us for a detailed description of the clown, and as we tried to provide as much information as possible, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching. The rest of the night was a blur. The police promised to increase patrols in the area, but the sense of security had been completely shattered. Lisa was pale and trembling, and I knew she was just as scared as I was. When we were finally allowed back inside, the house felt different. The place I had always considered safe and welcoming was now tainted by fear and violence. In the days that followed, I tried to move on, but the terror of that night still haunted me. The police never found the clown, and the idea that he might still be out there, possibly planning his next attack, was something I couldn't get out of my mind. I was pumped about the Halloween party I'd organized at my parents' house. They were out of town for a work event, and I had the entire house to myself. It was the perfect opportunity for a fun night with my friends. Maple Hill, New Jersey isn't exactly brimming with entertainment options, so a house party was always a good idea. The house was fully decorated with fake spider webs, glowing pumpkins, and flashing lights everywhere. My playlists were ready, and my friends' costumes were just as creative as I'd hoped. There were zombies, vampires, witches, and even a superhero or two mixed into the crowd. The vibe was relaxed, with everyone laughing, dancing, and having a good time. As I walked through the living room, chatting with some friends, I noticed someone I didn't immediately recognize. He was dressed in a skeleton costume with a mask that completely covered his face. It was a detailed costume, but there was something off about it. Most of my friends and acquaintances had their faces at least partially visible, so this fully masked skeleton stood out. I didn't recognize him, which was odd since I knew almost everyone at the party. I approached some friends, asking if they knew who the skeleton guy was. To my surprise, no one seemed to have any idea. Some thought he might be a friend of a friend, but no one knew for sure. My suspicions started to grow, but I tried not to let it spoil the party. With so many guests, it could just be someone who came with another group and decided to keep the costume fully intact. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to keep an eye on the skeleton from a distance, trying to figure out who he was, or at least what he was up to. As the night went on, I lost sight of the skeleton. I was called away to take care of a few things in the kitchen, and when I returned to the living room, he was gone. The house was crowded, so I assumed he was somewhere among the crowd, maybe out in the backyard or in the garage. But something continued to bother me, a feeling that I should have done more to find out who he was. Even with the loud music and laughter around me, the presence of that stranger in the middle of my party cast a shadow of worry over me. I decided that if I saw him again, I would confront him and find out who he was. The party was in full swing, but my discomfort kept growing. The stranger in the skeleton costume stayed on my mind. I tried to push aside the feeling that something was wrong, but the worry wouldn't leave me alone. I decided to do a sweep of the house, making sure everything was under control, and most importantly, that the skeleton was still around. I started downstairs, making my way through the living room, kitchen, and backyard, but he wasn't anywhere to be found. People were still having a great time, but for me, The party was starting to turn into a tense situation. When I went to the bathroom near the stairs, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The door to my parents' bedroom, which was always supposed to be locked during parties, was slightly open. A wave of fear washed over me. My parents' room was off limits during parties, and they always locked the door before leaving. I quickly ran upstairs, and as I reached the door, I pushed it open slowly, dreading what I might find on the other side. When the door was fully open, my stomach dropped. There was the skeleton, standing with his back to me, messing with a painting on the wall. He had slid the painting to the side, revealing a hidden safe. My parents were always discreet about the safe, and only a few people knew it even existed. Seeing the skeleton trying to open it made me freeze for a second. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I yelled, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My voice came out louder than I expected, and the skeleton spun around quickly, staring at me for what felt like an eternity. The dark eye sockets of the mask seemed to pierce right through me, revealing nothing of the person behind it. He didn't say a word. He just watched me for a moment before making a quick decision. The intruder shoved me hard, sending me crashing into the wall, and bolted out of the room. Still reeling from the shock and the force of the push, it took me a second to react. When I pulled myself together, I chased after him, stumbling down the stairs and shouting for others to stop him. The loud music and the confusion in the main room made it hard for people to understand what was happening. The skeleton moved quickly through the crowd, dodging people with ease. I saw him heading for the back door, and before I or anyone else could reach him, he disappeared into the darkness of the backyard. I ran to the back door, but all I could see were the shadows of the trees. He was gone. In a state of shock and with adrenaline pumping through my veins, I pulled out my phone and called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I went back to my parents' room to check the safe. Thankfully, it was still intact, still closed. I was relieved that nothing had been stolen, but the terror of knowing that the intruder had clear plans and had come so close to getting what he wanted left me deeply shaken. The minutes that followed were a blur of tension and fear. The police arrived quickly, and the party, which had been full of laughter and music, turned into a crime scene. My friends were confused, some scared, and everyone wanted to know what had happened. I explained to the officers what had occurred, still struggling to fully grasp the series of events that had just unfolded. The officers conducted a thorough search of the house and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of the intruder. He had vanished into the darkness, and no one at the party could give a useful description beyond what I had already provided. The skeleton, with his fully covered face, had blended into the crowd and escaped before anyone could stop him. As the police continued their investigation, one of the officers asked me about the safe. I told him that only a few people knew about the safe and that, as far as I knew, none of the guests that night should have been aware of it. This made the police even more suspicious. It seemed the intruder had planned his move, possibly even waiting for this party as the perfect opportunity to strike. My parents returned home the next morning, and I had to tell them what had happened. They were furious and deeply concerned at the same time. The thought that someone had broken into their home, attempting to steal from the safe while they were away, left them shaken. Their decision was immediate: no more parties at the house, and security would be significantly tightened. They installed cameras, changed the locks, and reinforced the doors. The safe was replaced with a more secure model, and any future parties or large gatherings at the house were strictly forbidden. The incident changed the dynamic of our home, which had always been a place of fun and relaxation, but was now marked by fear and caution. For me, the experience left a lasting mark. I felt responsible, guilty for allowing something so serious to happen under my watch. The image of the skeleton tampering with my parents' safe still haunted me, especially when I thought about what could have happened if he had succeeded in his plan or if someone had gotten hurt. I've always liked Halloween, but getting ready for it has never been my favorite part. This year was no different. We were just a few days away from the holiday, and my mom was determined to turn our house into a real haunted scene. She had already scattered pumpkins across the yard, hung fake spider webs, and placed skeletons in the windows. But there were still a few decorations stored in the attic, and guess who she sent to get them? "Lucas, I need you to grab the decorations from the attic," she said, leaving me little choice. I've always hated that place. It was dark, stuffy, and dusty, a space that seemed straight out of a horror movie. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the musty smell clung to my clothes every time I went up there. Reluctantly, I climbed the narrow stairs leading to the attic. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the gloomy space I always tried to avoid. The attic was full of old boxes, furniture covered with sheets, and so many cobwebs it looked like no one had set foot in there for years. As I rummaged through the boxes, searching for the one with the Halloween decorations, I started hearing a strange noise. It was a low sound, almost imperceptible, like something moving slowly in the dark. My first thoughts were that it must be a rat, or maybe just the usual sounds of an old house. I tried to ignore it, focusing on finding the decorations as quickly as possible so I could get out of there. But the sound persisted, insistent. Something was definitely moving up there, and it wasn't just my imagination. The discomfort started to turn into a chill down my spine. I looked around, trying to locate the source of the noise, but the attic was shrouded in shadows, with the boxes and furniture creating distorted shapes in the dark. I knew something wasn't right, but I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe just a stray animal. I just needed to grab the decorations and get out of there as fast as I could. But deep down, something told me there was more than that lurking in the attic. The noises continued, growing clearer and more disturbing. I tried to concentrate on the boxes, but my eyes kept drifting to the shadows in the back of the attic. Whatever was making that sound didn't seem like just a rat. The unease was growing inside me, and finally, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed a flashlight hanging on a hook on the wall. The dim light cut through the darkness, illuminating the dusty corners and revealing spiderwebs that seemed to shimmer in the beam. I took a deep breath and started following the sound, which seemed to be coming from a more secluded corner where some old boxes and blankets were piled up. Each step I took made the wooden floor creak under my feet, and the noise in the attic stopped for a moment, as if whatever was there knew I was approaching. This made me even more nervous. The attic felt more closed in, more suffocating than ever. When I finally got close to the corner where the sound had originated, I saw something move under the piled-up blankets. My heart raced. There was definitely someone there. I stepped back, almost tripping over a box as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. Panic started to take hold of me. "Who's there?" My voice came out shaky, almost a whisper, as the flashlight trembled in my hand. No answer, just the sound of something or someone breathing heavily under the blankets. Before I could react, the blanket shifted abruptly, revealing a figure wrapped in it. For a moment, we stared at each other, and the shock froze me in place. It was a man, dirty and with wide, fearful eyes, like a cornered animal. His clothes were tattered, and he looked scared, but there was something wild in his gaze that terrified me. I didn't wait to see what he would do. I bolted from the attic, almost tripping down the stairs in my haste. My mom was in the kitchen, and as soon as she saw me, she knew something was wrong. "Lucas, what happened?" she asked, her voice filled with growing concern. "There's someone in the attic," I shouted, still in a panic. At first, she seemed skeptical, as if she couldn't believe something like that could be happening. But when she saw the genuine fear on my face, she didn't hesitate. She rushed to the attic door, locking it tightly before grabbing the phone to call the police. The minutes that followed were filled with tension and fear. We stayed away from the door, listening for any sound from above, dreading that the man might try to come down. The minutes until the police arrived felt like hours. My mom and I sat in silence in the living room, our ears tuned to any sound that might come from the attic. My heart was still racing, and my mind was spinning with terrifying possibilities of what could happen next. Finally, the sound of approaching sirens brought us a brief moment of relief. 2 officers arrived at the door, and my mom quickly led them to the entrance of the attic. They asked us to stay in the living room while they went upstairs, flashlights in hand and their hands near their weapons, ready for anything. We stood there, listening to the heavy footsteps of the officers climbing the stairs and the attic door being opened slowly. My mom gripped my hand tightly, and I could feel her fear through her hold. Everything was silent up there, except for the sound of the floorboards creaking under the officers' feet. Suddenly, we heard a firm command, followed by a murmur and quick movements. A few minutes later, the officers came down the stairs, bringing the man I had seen in the attic. His hands were up, looking lost and confused, but he didn't resist. The officers explained that he was a homeless man who had snuck into the house the previous night, likely through the back door, which my mom sometimes forgot to lock. He had climbed up to the attic looking for a safe, warm place to spend the night, and ended up staying hidden there. His scary appearance and strange behavior were the result of days spent living on the streets, without proper food or rest. My mom and I were in shock. The attic, already a place I avoided, had now turned into a space of nightmares. The man was taken away by the officers, who assured us that he didn't seem to have any intention of harming anyone, but the invasion of our privacy and the feeling of vulnerability were overwhelming. After the police left, my mom reinforced all the locks in the house. She spent the rest of the day checking windows and doors, making sure nothing was left open or poorly secured. I tried to help, but I was in a daze, replaying the moment I saw the man in the attic, hidden among the boxes and blankets. Halloween, which had always been a fun time for us, was now tainted by fear. That night, instead of preparing the house for the festivities, we stayed on high alert, locked inside, unable to shake the feeling that our safe space had been violated. We knew the man wouldn't come back, but the memory of his presence would stay with us for a long time.